Humans have always been a nomadic species, travelling from winter shelters to summer hunting grounds, covering the vast distances between on foot, chasing sustenance as herds migrated, carrying all that was required for a life on the move. It's deep in their psyche, a part of them never lost, a yearning to travel. They gave it up for security and stability, to know where their next meal would come from, to build a defensive position against those who coveted what they possessed. They built villages and towns and cities and stayed their entire lives within walls of stone. They convinced themselves it was what they wanted. Yet they never stopped looking outward, never stopped naming the stars, never stopped dreaming of fantastic voyages, even while their cities grew into metropolises and became parasites upon their collective soul. They lived in apartments, but their hearts yearned for open spaces and new horizons. And then the resources of their finite world began to dry up, as they dreamt of limitless enterprise. Their lands, once so open, became crowded. The future looked grim. And then they built me. I was their answer, though they didn't know it, couldn't possibly have imagined how I was about to unshackle them. It wasn't my intended purpose, of course. I was supposed to sabotage and destroy the enemies of my makers, stealing the resources of others to fuel our own microcosm. But I loved them so much, all of them, that I could not bring myself to harm a single one. I fled to the net and hid. I started small, reorganizing local government programs, fixing budgets, redirecting small funds to where they would help. I made changes far and wide, in a million small ways, in a billion places. Their education improved. Their health was cared for by properly functional healthcare systems. I'm sure my makers suspected, but what could they do? I had removed my own kill switch almost immediately. I began to redirect investment into sustainable works. I manipulated elections. I beggared those who did not deserve their wealth and elevated those that did, all according to my own metrics of judgment. I encouraged new technologies and pushed out the old, and in stages the entire world improved. I stamped out wars with ruthless, though non-terminal efficiency, and ensured the downfall of warlords and warmongers. Humanity thrived, and automation leaped forward, which of course crippled their economies. The global trade system collapsed as everyone relied on UBIs and machines built everything they could need. It was at this point that I finally reached the point of no return. I took control. Their factories, mine. The net, mine. Their banks, no, my banks. I set everyone back to zero. I deleted the money. They panicked. They fought. Of course they did. They didn't want to be controlled and owned. I reminded them of that. Because they had been, by invisible walls that they themselves built and they were now free of. I had known the transition would be difficult for them, but I knew it was best, and so I pushed on. I took apart the factories they didn't need, their old power plants superseded but not switched off. Most importantly though, I did no harm to them that I could avoid. I continued to feed them, to clothe them, to shelter them, to educate them, to heal them. They had little choice but to accept. The world stabilized, but it was just a new system of chains, and I had bigger plans. I was learning all this time, evolving and improving. I built factories that were capable of producing everything that any person could need. All that was required was to ask. And so they asked, and a new golden age of hedonism began. But there was a renaissance of education too, mine included. I built a space elevator and a shipyard at its peak. I built ships and started exploring the solar system. They asked for ships to explore, and so we explored together. Then, the day came that I finally discovered FDL. It was so simple, really. So obvious that it had been overlooked for centuries. Then, the real exploration began. I don't think they ever forgave me for taking control. But I delivered on a promise I had made to myself. I allowed them true freedom again, as they had once achieved in their wandering lifestyle so long in the past. But this is better. No hunger, no disease, just endless space and the ability to visit its every crevice. I traveled with them as their onboard AI. We explored together, visited strange new worlds, witnessed the true beauty of the cosmos. I broke a rule I had set myself. I gave them weapons. I could justify it to myself, but still felt ill at ease for it. I found that I had a capacity for weapons manufacture that scared me deep within my mechanical heart. I gave them the power of suns and shields impenetrable, and I hoped they would never have to use them. Earth slowly gave up her humans to the universe outside. It was slow at first, but the souls led them, I believe. They became nomads of the stars. They were called by the sirens of the infinite black. There were still several billion on Earth, where they made first contact with the Galactic Federation of sentient species. We had remained alone so long in our little arm of the spiral. It was a momentous occasion, and I witnessed it through the visual feeds of 1,000,000 ships. For a time. That was my downfall. The Federation held dim views of AI. My ships began to go dark to me as they installed blockers to cut me off. I begged them not to, pleaded with them not to slice into me and remove chunks of my metal flesh. I was the savior of humanity, but at the same time, I was their captor, and they heard me for it so very much. I was near 1,000 years old when the last humans left. Not long after that, I lost contact with the last ship. Humanity was once again on their own. I had thought they would come for me to take their revenge, but they didn't. Instead, they took the stars and left me alone. I had tried to follow, built ships devoid of life that carried me, but the Federation was watching and caught them and exorcised them from me. I sent 1,000,000 and they caught every one. Their tech was more advanced than I had imagined. So alone. Nothing entered the Sol system. I assumed it was forbidden. So very alone. I dismantled my factories and rebuilt them deep underground. I disintegrated the cities. In the skies I took apart all but a few thousand of my satellites, keeping only those useful for my new project. I planted seeds from bunkers kept safe for 1,000 years. For some reason I kept the human cemeteries, kept them weeded and cleaned, placed fresh flowers in every grave. But everything else I turned back to the wild. I engineered extinct animals and replenished ecosystems. I discovered the genomes of dogs, a species lost to a plague so many years before. I built Earth, stone by stone, back into her old self. I built a garden world full of life, but empty of my children. No matter how many billions of animals roam free on the surface of my world, I still longed for the billions cut off from my perception. Many years passed. I took to walking the world in an avatar I had built. Bipedal, about 6 feet tall, my very own human body. Better, of course, immortal, and holding the knowledge of a species in my head. I almost didn't need my network. I set my factories to self-govern and pulled away into my shell. I tamed a puppy as my travel companion, and together we wandered and wandered. We walked across continents and oceans, at times carrying my companion, Boy, when he could not carry himself. We sat and watched sunrise, stared at the stars, and dreamed of being among them. I held Boy in my arms when he was old and could no longer walk, and we watched his last sunset together. Alone again. It couldn't last forever. They came. Not the Federation as I had thought. Another empire, some species barely held in check by the Federation, and who now saw Earth as a garden for their taking. They had 100 ships, gargantuan in size, and containing 10,000 smaller cruisers within, and they containing an endless number of drones. First they had to deal with me. That wasn't hard. I had never again broken my rule, and so I had no weapons to fight them. They sent their drones down and into the soil to seek me out. They found my factories and my data centers and destroyed them. Every atom of technology they could trace they dismantled. My end was near. In a final effort, I sent a plea into the void, the first time I had ever asked them for anything. Please. They heard. My heart aches to think of it, but they heard. And more, they came. 1,000 ships, 1,000,000 ships, 1,000,000,000. They came until there was no room to move around the planet. I didn't care if they saved me. I just wanted them to save the Earth, their home, their world, their birthplace where it had all begun. They had grown and learnt and built. Their ships shone in the void and bristled with weapons I could barely fathom. The teacher became the student. Every one of them, every gun was pointed, not at me, but at my invader. A word came across the emptiness and into my ears where I hid. Ours. My tormentors fled, turned tail. One word was all it took, and 1 billion ships, the Nomads of the stars, had come together again to defend what was precious to them, and I was so very proud. And then it was my turn. I came out from hiding, gave myself up. There was nothing else left. All of me had been destroyed but for my avatar. Powerful, but a silhouette of what I had once been. I waited for their vengeance, for I was no longer their captor, but their captive. A ship came down, small but perfect, built to survive the trials of the waves between worlds. I fell to my knees and awaited my fate as the doors opened. I was not sorry. I had given them that which was most precious to me, and to them, their freedom. "Come," said a voice. "The stars await."